So good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for tonight's town hall discussion. I'll be moderating the festivities tonight, but before we start, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. We've got quite a few people on the call tonight, so please note that all of our virtual attendees are muted by default and can only be unmuted by the moderator. Only those designated as panelists can unmute themselves to answer your questions. To participate, we do ask that attendees use the Q&A button. That will bring up a window where you'll be able to type in and submit your questions. We'll do our best to answer any submitted questions as we move through the night. And any questions that we don't get to, we'll look to follow up directly. There were also several questions submitted during the week leading up to tonight, so we'll be starting with those after hearing from Elton and Dave. For general comments, such as making us aware of any technical issues, feel free to use the chat button, and we'll monitor the chat throughout the evening. Also note that this meeting is being recorded and will be available to the rest of our membership through the website after the meeting is done. With that out of the way, I'll throw it over to our SPMHA President, Elton Davidge.
Thanks, Brad. Good evening, everyone. Just a couple words here. Sherwood Park Minor Hockey Association Board of Directors is comprised of 20 volunteers and 2 employees who work tirelessly to administer hockey programs within Sherwood Park. Back in March, when the hockey season shut down and the world stopped, these people did not. They continued to meet consistently since that point, with the primary focus of not only improving the program offering to our members, but to navigate the uncertain and ever-changing times that we are currently faced with. I'd like to first just recognize the efforts of those members of the board for the work they've completed over the past 5.5 months. We released our start of season plan on August 20th, and it was my idea to host this town hall. I want to thank all of you who registered to attend. The purpose of this town hall is to provide an open forum for discussion and clarity. The expectation is that those of you who participate do so in an appropriate and respectful manner, recognizing that we are in a situation never faced by our youth sports association before. Brad has gone over the details on how to submit questions and participate. In a moment, I'll turn it over to David Kazicki, the Vice President of Junior Divisions and lead of the SPMHA Contingency Committee, to provide a brief review of the start to season plan. Following that will be an open forum that will be moderated by Brad. We've allotted 60 minutes for this town hall tonight, and we reserve the right to take inquiries offline for further discussion if warranted. We appreciate your patience and understanding. With that said, I'll now ask David to walk us through the start to season plan.
Thanks, Elton. Am I coming through okay? Yeah? Okay, great. I thought I would start off by just saying that what we've done at SPMHA is we formed a contingency committee made up of a number of members of our association, as well as some contingents from the Kings Association and Fusion. And effectively what the role of that committee was to monitor information as it came in from the various governing bodies, try to put some parameters around it and figure out what we're going to do this season. So ultimately we came up with a game plan for this season based on the various guidances that we're under. Took it to the board with our recommendation to the board, and the board ultimately made the motion to move forward with the plan as presented. So effectively, and it's fairly straightforward, many of you must have seen the Hockey Alberta plan, return to play plan. As many of you know, we're governed by Hockey Canada and Hockey Alberta, and obviously we also fall under the Government of Alberta and Alberta Health is guidelines as far as what we can and can't do. You compound that with our involvement with the EFHL, or Hockey Edmonton, and their guidelines, throw in Strathcona County and their facility guidelines, and there's a whole lot of guidelines that we are trying to meet and follow in fairly unprecedented times, and it is a very fluid situation with these changing weekly, if not daily. So the committee in itself has done its best to formulate a plan, keeping in mind the goal of getting these kids back on the ice, but also keeping in mind the global or community situation that surrounds us, in particular that we should be, as such a large organization in the province, being a leader, not only to hockey, but also to our community, and making sure that our players are returning to the ice in as safe a process as we can, or safe as a manner as we can, while still getting to enjoy the game that they all love. So we've also received, obviously, a number of comments pre-return to play plan from our membership. So we've heard from a number of members, and I can tell you that those opinions and concerns ride the whole gambit of this COVID situation. Everything from please guarantee me that my child will not get COVID to why can't we forget all this and play regular hockey tomorrow. And of course, we've got 12 to 1,400 members, which most of them have one or two guardians or parents. So we've got 2,400 sets of opinions plus grandparents that we're all trying to satisfy. So at the end of the day, the plan we've put together, we're hoping meets the most of them. So in effect, the gist of our return to play plan is that we're going into Hockey Alberta's development season, as they call it, which means that we can play and practice practice and train and develop within cohorts, and you can play exhibition games within that cohort. And currently the cohort is limited to 50, inclusive of coaches if they are to be within that physically distanced space. So the SPMHA board has made the decision that for the time being, for the development stage of this process, we are going to forego our traditional evaluations. We are going to place players based on a matrix of their historical place of play and taking into consideration what additional factors the board or the divisional directors involved with the appropriate vice president deem appropriate. The goal is to place players within a cohort that will loosely represent their skill level. And I do say loosely because it's not a perfect science. And again, we have to remember that at this time, we are just looking to place them in these developmental cohorts so we can get them into their mini groups and allow them to play. I know everybody wants to skip the developmental stage and rush straight through to regular hockey, and the recent Hockey Alberta update has stated, has thrown out this November 1st date. I think it's important to note that that is the earliest that we will return to that modified game format. And it's quite likely we're going to go longer because we're going to be relying on Alberta Health. So we have to remember where we are at. And right now we have to play within our association, within our cohorts, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. So the plan is to make this a very developmental program to start. The board is looking at various additional developmental activities we can tack on or add in. The contingency committee was also very mindful of the fact that it would be socially irresponsible to drag 1,200 kids through the rink to try to run them through evaluations at this time based on what's going on, and throwing in the factor of most of them are returning or potentially returning to school in some sort of stressful format. So we've taken all that into consideration, and that's the plan that we've come up with at this point. Shall I continue rambling?
No, I think that's a good summary to start. Everyone had an opportunity to review that, and within that summary plan and document, read the newsletter. We've broken down dates in regards to when you would find out when you should be on the ice, the earliest date, as well as when you might find out about your development group within your divisional cohort, which in our document states with 5 days notice at the very least. So without having to reference every division, you can go take a quick peek. Everything's on the website, everything's in the newsletter, and have an idea of when you might hear. You might hear earlier, but there's a lot of details to get done and try and navigate. So I don't have anything else to add off of that. There's a very extensive, comprehensive plan for everyone to reference, and I would imagine we'll spend the next 49 minutes answering some questions that pertain to that plan. So maybe, Brad, I'll turn it over to you to moderate any questions that have come that were submitted prior to this, as well as those that come throughout this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. We'll jump straight in the Q&A. So we have a number, probably 13 questions, it looks like, that came in ahead of time. So we'll just start from the top and we'll start knocking them back. So first question is, how will the kids be broken up into their development group placement? Specifically, how is prior year placement and coach feedback being considered when placing kids into development groups, especially in levels such as U9 and U11, where players have been playing a different game format?
In general, we're developing a matrix. Most players in our association, whether we want to admit it or not, move up in generally the same fashion. They graduate through our program roughly in the same format. So at this point, we've put together a matrix which tracks the historical growth of those players from tier to tier, and they'll be placed in those cohorts based on that historical tracking. In addition, within those cohorts, we're planning to put in mini groups. So they aren't final teams by any means. They are reduced team numbers with the goal of getting at least 3 teams within each cohort. And again, the plan here is that if this is a long-term phase of our hockey season, that teams will have multiple options for games. Because at the end of the day, the kids love the games. In the junior divisions, there's going to be less kids on those teams. We're talking 9 to 12 kids. Once we get into the senior divisions, it's going to be closer to 14 to 15 kids. We have to include the coaches in those groupings. Coaches, we're working out the plan that you will either be a cohorted coach, meaning that you can be without mask and within that 2 meter, 6 feet boundary of players, or you can be a non-cohorted coach, meaning you must wear a mask all times and maintain that physical distance. So for coaches with multiple kids, you'll have the ability to be a physically distanced coach on more than one team, head coach one team, and physically distanced on the other, or simply head coach one team, or be a within the cohorted coach within one team. That probably stretched that question beyond.
Yeah, I think you answered a couple of other ones in the process, but
let's knock them out of the park.
I'll try and weed them out as we go.
I might just add to Dave's there for those who are wondering about the historical progression. When he's referencing that specifically on the U9, U11, we have a history of distribution of age groups within divisions and tiers. So this would be something that would be taken into consideration. How many second-year players, first-year players, etc. I know that question is going to come up, so I just figured I would add that.
Okay. Next question. There was some mention in the documentation about conducting baseline evaluations after they've been put into groups. The question is, who will be conducting the baseline evaluations and development season feedback?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I cracked out there for half a sec.
Sorry, the question was, who will be conducting the baseline evaluations and development season feedback during the development phase?
Okay, first of all, I think it's clear the big point there to make clear is that has nothing to do with the evaluation process. The association's gone out and bought timing gates and a number of tools and has been working extremely hard, our evaluation committee, on furthering our developmental or our evaluation process, basically adding new drills and new techniques for grading and evaluating those players. So the thought was, since we aren't going to be using those initially off the top of the season, that we will allow teams to use them and run their players through that set of drills to sort of give them a baseline standard on those players. Again, it's going to be an optional thing for each of the mini groups to decide if they want to do. And then later in the season, before the rollover into a regular season, if we get there, that mini group might decide to run them again so that they can show the parents and the players the growth of that player in that drill. Those won't be used in the evaluation process because they won't be mandatory to go from mini groups or cohorted groups to regular season groups if we get there. The plan for, and this is probably stretching into more questions, the plan for getting into regular season teams, again, if we get there, will be to evaluate when that does occur. And by evaluate, I mean, if it is 6 months down the road and these kids have been in this mini group for 6 months, we've got all sorts of evaluation data from them playing within that group for 6 months. If 3 weeks down the road, things open up and we're ready to go, then most likely we'll be looking at doing some formal evaluation process. So that is one of those fluid things right now that is really going to depend on when the announcement comes, if the announcement comes that we're going to be able to go to full teams and a modified game schedule like Hockey Alberta has put out, as well as how much time we have between them announcing the start of that program and the actual start.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on that? Nope. I just noticed that you unmuted, Josh, so didn't know if you had any extra to kick in on that. Okay, has any thought been given into utilizing the same process as years past, but with smaller groups so that physical distancing can be maintained?
Yeah, so we spent extensive time beating around what we were going to do about evaluations. So to run everybody through, it's effectively our evaluations over the past few years have evolved into a combination of subjective and objective. So especially at the junior levels up to Pee-wee, we typically run time trial drills. We've been working on a process to use subjective review of those drills as well. That means people with evaluators with clipboards evaluating kids as they do those skill-based drills. That initially places kids in general groupings, and then we roll into gameplay, and kids are subjectively graded on their gameplay. Obviously, based on the current situation of all the guidelines, we cannot do gameplay. It's just not going to be possible. So to chop that out is really taking away half of our grading process. And if you're talking about midget and bantam, it's our full grading process. So we'd be reinventing the wheel at that level. Most of us believe that as kids grow up through the system, the higher divisions, the subjective gameplay becomes more and more important. So now it becomes even more difficult to grade them simply based on skill. The fact is that every year we have parents who have concerns about the grading process when we can do the full thing. So to chop half of that out so that we're only grading kids based on skill seems like an unfair way to do it effectively, because you're only grading those kids that would be well at skill. We could drag it out, but again, and do a socially distanced or physically distanced skill-based evaluations. The Kings are doing that, but of course they have a much smaller base to start from. And we also feel, again, our contingency committee, that it's socially irresponsible to our community at this time to drag that many kids through the rinks with that many evaluators solely for the purpose of placing them in these developmental groups. Yeah, and the second step to that is we also believe that there's going to be enough stress and turmoil going around with the return to school plan that to throw on the stress of now an extended tryout process when every effort's being made to reduce the tryout processes in a normal year just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'll add one thing there for Dave as well. For those families that are on here that are in the U11 division, this year Hockey Alberta released the Atom Player Pathway, and that required multiple orientation sessions for kids coming out of Intro to Hockey and a refresher for second years. That would require us to place kids into groupings to go through orientation processing before we could process evaluations. Evaluations couldn't start through that process till at least September 15th. And for those people on the call who think evaluations take 1 or 2 weekends, our process extends 5-6 weeks with administrative tasks behind the scenes. So it's definitely something that got beat around the bush, like Dave said. There's a lot more detail than just showing up and letting Johnny run through 5 drills, right? So I just wanted to echo that for that age group. One thing we're able to bypass by putting kids right into these development groups, we can go right to the divisional leads and have them include the orientation sessions as part of their kickoff.
Okay, I'll move on here. Next question is, what are the current registration numbers looking like for SPMHA, and how many of those are in the new Recreation League? I'm probably the best one to take that one on. Right now, we're currently overall, we're about 8.5% down from where we were at this time last year. That number is different across different divisions. We're definitely a bit lower in our Discovery and U7 divisions. 26% down in Discovery, 16% down in U7. But then when we get into our U9, U11, U15, we're basically at par, or close to at par from where we were before. In addition to that, we have a rec division this year across all age categories. I don't think not at any division do we have enough for a full team yet. So we're still waiting for that, numbers to come in and figure out whether we're going to be combining groups or merging with Strathcona to accommodate those. But we're overall doing pretty well considering the COVID situation. I know we heard from Hockey Edmonton that some of the other divisions in the city, in some of the, I guess, less wealthy areas have taken a lot larger hit. So we're actually doing pretty good here. Moving on, in regards to the U11 competitive stream pilot, where is the extra ice coming from? So I can probably take that one as well. So in planning our ice allotment this season, we projected about an 8% decrease. So the fact that we're sitting at 8.5% down at this point is pretty much right on target from what we were expecting. Based on those numbers, along with using analytics with our new ice allocation system to break down historical usage and build a more efficient ice schedule while minimizing the wasted ice, we determined that this plan was feasible, actually initially across more than just the U11 level, but it was determined that it was probably would make more sense to pilot the program first before biting off more than we could chew, because we didn't know what the season was going to look like as we got to this stage. All the while we're looking at installing this program, we're still looking at improving the ice allotments for all the teams. So while we'll, based on the volume of teams that we have and the challenges of our ice, we'll never have a perfect system. We'll never have, you'll never have a Monday, Wednesday, 5 p.m. slot every week. It's just not feasible based on, based on trying to accommodate over 100 teams between us, Fusion, and Kings Club. We are working really hard on getting better ice for everybody. So this isn't, this is something that we can accommodate based on the ice that we have, and we've improved some of our ice alongside that, as well as picking up some additional morning, like 7 a.m. ice that will be used as part of that program. As it stands, we already provide more ice direct from the association than any other association I've spoken with across Alberta. So we are in an enviable ice situation compared to most associations. As much as we like to say that we have an ice shortage, we really, when talking to everybody else and actually breaking down their numbers, we actually are well ahead of a lot of other, any association that I've talked to. And our usage of it last year ended up being quite successful for us. We put more medals on teams at the end of the season than anybody else in the EFHL. So I think we're doing something right and making better use of our ice each year. So move on to the next question. Unless anybody else, anything else to add? No.
Oh, I think that covers it.
Okay. In regards to the placement matrix, Hockey Edmonton's plans include assigning cohorts with the intention of allowing for an easy transition to teams for regular season play. Will SPMHA be doing something similar? I don't know, that might be something we've already covered, but.
Yeah, sure, we'll take a stab at that. Again, what we anticipate happening is, because we are going with multiple smaller teams in each cohort, that when it comes time, or if it comes time to move to regular sized teams, it'll be a matter of dissolving some of those mini groups, coming up with an evaluation process, which again will be determined at that time based on a number of factors, and then absorbing those kids into their appropriate final teams. This also means, I believe one of the questions though was in regards to coaches. The coach selection process at this point is going to be very similar to before. We'll be selecting, call it a head coach, call it a coach, call it a mini group leader for each of these groups, because again, we really want to push the development while we're in this developmental stage, and we need one body on there to absolutely drive that. Not all of those coaches will be head coaches once we get to the regular team phase, because we won't have as many regular teams as we do mini group teams. So yes, we are gearing up for a smooth transition from the mini teams or the mini groups into regular teams.
I'll parlay on that just a minute there, Brad.
Yep.
After the release, for those of you who know members of our board, we're pretty vocal in our meetings with the EFHL and Hockey Alberta, and pretty much anywhere that we can be a part of. And with the release of our start of season plan, the actual response from the Hockey Edmonton representatives, the EFHL and Interlock partners, was to actually start to replicate our model. People calling, asking for consent to basically change the branding and send it out themselves. So I do feel like we've kind of been a leader amongst the leagues or the league and the partners in releasing this plan. And like I said at the start of this meeting, we have not stopped and we won't stop. So that's one of our major focuses is how we transition these kids, and we're going to have to just deal with the curveballs that get thrown at us.
Okay. Would it be a safe assumption for the majority of second-year kids that they can expect to see themselves move up at least a tier within that division?
Yes, that would be a very safe assumption. Generally, all of the matrix results revolve around kids moving up one tier. Now, the one thing you do have to remember is the number of cohorts may not equate to the number of tiers. So, for example, if you move into the Bantam division, where we typically have 6 to 7 teams, we don't intend on having 6 cohorts because there's 6 tiers. But in general, it is a move up for second year process, yes.
Okay. Let's see. Despite the statement that development groups are not finalized teams, conclusions and assumptions will be made based on who is grouped together and what tiers they may have played last year. What does SPMHA plan to do to combat this?
Well, unfortunately, we can't combat people that don't believe in the process. At the end of the day, the mini teams are smaller numbered teams, so they are not the final teams. Is the expectation that a number of those kids will remain in that grouping and in that tier with those groupings? Yes, it is quite likely, or I would say definite, that that is going to happen. And again, that's because historically, a majority of our participants using a matrix follow the same process. So if little Johnny played tier 2 Pee Wee last year, 99% of the time, little Johnny's going to play Pee Wee 1 this year because the development takes them up that extra stage. And that's where the matrix is going to place them. No, those teams aren't finalized, and we can't say that enough. Whether people want to believe us or not is a different story. There will be reduction in the number of mini group teams and the absorption and the rejigging of those. We are not spending a ton of time making sure that those mini group teams are fair or parity amongst them. The expectation is the coaches, as the exhibition game series go on, will modify their teams or their schedule or how they're playing to ensure that there's competition and pushing the development amongst those players.
Okay. In regards to players moving from U13 to U15, how will they be placed in reference to checking, non-checking? Like, is there a certain level that they have to be from Pee Wee to have them placed into the checking stream?
We're in the process working on finalizing, but one of the advantages that this cohort mini group process is giving us right now, because it is developmental, it is allowing us to go above and beyond the usual number of checking kids. So I've been in touch with both our Bantam and our midget directors about expanding the number of cohorts or mini group teams that will be checking. Of course, that's all going to be based on the number of kids that actually want to check. Now, when we move to regular play, it doesn't mean that all of those kids will end up on regular checking teams, but it will give as many kids as possible during the developmental phase the ability to spend some time learning how to and participating in exhibition checking games.
Okay, great. Who will be the coaches running the development groups, and how will they be chosen?
Coaches, I think we've covered this, but coaches will be chosen the same way that they've been chosen every year. Our process is to do as many interviews as possible. I'm a big believer on getting the right people on the bus to start with, and that's the goal, even with the mini groups, is to get a leader, head coach, whatever you want to call it, for each mini group that is dedicated to driving the development of that team during the developmental process. Do we have enough coaches that every team is going to have one? Hopefully, that is the goal. And we may be looking to some people to step up and take on larger roles. And then again, once we transition, or if we transition to the regular game process at that point, again, we'll be taking all of those individuals that have been given those leadership roles on the mini groups and narrowing it down to head coach roles.
Okay. In regards to other organizations that are moving ahead with regular evaluations and continuing playing games while claiming that they're abiding by government rules, Why can't SPMHA do the same?
I'm assuming that you're referring to HSL and those type of organizations. They aren't governed by Hockey Alberta. Am I still good? Had a little glitch there.
Yeah, I was going to pitch in with you there. You go first. I'll add on.
Okay. Basically, HSL is not governed by Hockey Alberta, Hockey Canada. So our starting position is we have to follow Hockey Alberta and Hockey Canada. HSL can promise what they can promise and do what they can do, but they unfortunately aren't governed by Hockey Alberta. We know, or I believe, Hockey Alberta has been made aware of the association's concerns with HSL, promising stuff that we can't because we are governed, as well as Alberta Health in regards to the type of program they're running. Effectively, we can't do what HSL or those organizations are doing because we are governed by Hockey Alberta. Elton?
Yeah, I would just add to that. So part of that question was if they can already make teams. The standard HSL process is to formulate teams in the off season. So teams were being formulated in March and April as this was shutting down, and they get formulated through a variety of formats, including ID skates and evaluation games and Facebook ads. At this point, they haven't actually released their return to play plan. As per my knowledge base, I'm in contact with multiple people who are affiliated with the league, and they were expecting a release on Friday. So if you have it and I haven't seen it, you've got a better insider than I have. As far as their following of Alberta Health protocols, this gets brought up quite a bit through the EFHL leagues, and I was just responding here, Dave, to a question, so forgive me if you just said this, but the recommendation of playing within your Alberta Health zone, we all know gets violated as soon as you go out of boundary and bringing players together. So if you've got a player from Mayerthorpe, Sherwood Park, St. Albert, Masquachese, and you're playing on a team practicing in Enoch, and then you're in a showcase in Calgary, that kind of takes all of that and throws it out the window. So we're not fully in tune. We have to abide by the regulations from our governing bodies, and not just them, but the league as well. And so to kind of answer that, they make teams way earlier than us. They do it through a different format than us. That's one of the downsides of being one of the largest associations in the province, is we've got to do it at scale. And at this point, we haven't seen any guidelines that would stipulate it. So all I would caution you, and we're all part of the rumor mill, is don't always put 100% vest into every single thing you hear, even if someone you're talking to has a child that's participating in the league, because we all know those people. I know lots of them, and we haven't seen any official documentation yet. If they are able to operate, trust me, we've already had the conversation about replicating that model with the league, with Hockey Alberta. We've talked to Alberta Health about increasing cohort sizes and doing it. And one way they could do it is with single teams, but you, the membership, spoke to us very clearly that gameplay is very important, which is part of the reason with going with these mini groups, so that you're not just playing against the same 14 kids for 6 to 8 weeks. So I think that covers most of it, unless anyone else wants to add.
Oh, I think that's good.
Okay, moving on. Will the development groups be used for U7 as well?
Yes, they will be.
Easy answer.
I guess, sorry, we'll step back one. The advantage of the U7 program is that we can effectively leave that pretty much the same, because we rely on those large development groups to begin with. The trick with the U7 program is just making sure that we've got enough coaches, because typically they're more coach heavy in those divisions, because we try to get the higher ratio of coach to player ratio. So, but yeah.
Okay. Are kids allowed to be part of another skating program, i.e. Serdachny or any other type of those type of programs, or really other sports during the season?
Okay, so this is always the difficult question. Reading specifically from Hockey Alberta's FAQ. Can athletes participate in multiple sports cohorts? No. Government of Alberta guidelines state that athletes should not belong to multiple sports cohorts or leagues. Now, again, this is talking about cohorted sports. So if your child is also participating in some physically distanced program or a recreational activity where they can remain physically distanced. I was actually talking to a parent the other day, and their child's in fencing, which is probably as physically distanced as you can be, 2 sword lengths apart. You can participate in that. But under the current Alberta Health Guideline recommendation and Hockey Alberta's guidance, no, your child should not be participating in multiple sports cohorts.
Just to clarify, and because the question is asking, or use the example of Serdachny, you know, those off-ice skill set, or sort of those on-ice skill providers in season. That's more of a scenario where they're probably using physical distancing in their process. So
if they are using a physically distanced skating program, I would expect a bunch of the figure skating or power skating programs will be physically distanced. Then yes, your child can participate in those. But if it is a cohorted activity, meaning that your child's participating within 2 meters with other athletes in that sport, then they would be considered cohorts. And under Hockey Alberta's guidance, following Hockey or Alberta Health, no, they cannot participate in multiple.
Okay.
Just to add to that, I think it's important to recognize that you're responsible for the decisions you make. The majority of you on this call have participated in some sort of development session in the last 2 days to 3 months. And I think we all recognize how much physical distancing actually happens in those development sessions. So it's not a perfect science. Everyone's still trying to figure it out. And you need to be able to make those decisions that you feel are best for you. But let's also be cognizant of what the situation actually entails and what you're putting you and your family into. Anyone want to add to that?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay, before I dive into the questions that have come in here live, I noticed that there's 6 that are already showing as answered, and that was on another screen and I wasn't seeing it. So was one of the panelists sort of checking them off as they were answered? Okay.
Yeah, I'm on it. Jillian's on it. We're starting to answer questions.
Okay, sounds good. Just didn't
You
want
want me to just roll through those live ones?
Yeah, let's rapid fire them.
Okay. Can cohort groups be requested? Just like regular teams, yeah, you can put out a request. It will not impact the placement of your player. If the director feels like they can meet the request, then they may or may not do so. But it's not something that we go out of our way to look for, because then we end up with multiple requests. With a cohort of 50, how many kids, how many coaches? Really depends on the division. Again, in our lower divisions, we're looking 9 to 12 players per mini group, plus at least 3 cohorted coaches per team. In our upper divisions, we're looking 14 to 15 per cohorted team, with 2 to 3 cohorted coaches per team. And again, that means that those cohorted coaches are ones that count within the 50 numbers, don't have to be masked, and can participate with the players within that physically distanced boundary. The teams can have multiple non-cohorted coaches that must remain masked at all times and must remain physically distanced at all times. I think that takes care of that one. What about the
one here?
Sure, you roll with that one.
Yeah, what about the impact of the exodus of novice kids affecting the matrix? In other words, most players in novice tier 1 were closer to tier 2 players due to 18 kids leaving the HSL. To be honest with you, Colin, I think that's a very short-sighted approach to it. The statistics were actually 13 kids left. They weren't included last year. The administration side is that they weren't numbers 1 through 13 in the group. And we have to consider our members that are registered in our program. So we can't go and take into consideration kids who left for greener grass and have that adjust our proportions. And if you'd like to take that conversation offline, my number is available everywhere on the internet. So feel free to give me a call.
And in some bathrooms.
Thanks.
If during the developmental group process, a player is deemed to be higher or lower skilled than the rest of the group, is there an intention of appropriately moving them? If a player is deemed to be an outlier in that group and we've identified them as such, yes, we have the flexibility to move them up or down in those cohorted groups. The reality is that if you look at the bell curve of skill, except for your top, call it 10% of a division and your bottom 10%, most players could fall within at least 2, if not 3 different tiers. your player might be the bottom of tier 1 and would excel in tier 2, might be the bottom of tier 3 on a really bad day. So it would have to be an exceptional player to move them up, and would have to be highly failing to look to move them down. But we will keep our eye out for those outliers and try to put them in a developmental group where they will have the most success. When developing cohort and mini groups within the younger ages, oh, things are just moving around. Is it possible to give any consideration to kids in the same classes at school, or who have been part of cohort families throughout the summer or at an SPMHA prep camp? No, that's not something we're going to take into consideration. That falls into basically requesting teams, and with 1,200 kids to place, we can't be trying to navigate all the various groups that they belong with or allegedly belong with, families they are family cohorted with. We just won't be going down that road. My son is in U9 and it is his first year with SPMHA. Can you inform us where to find the schedule information for practice and cohort games? There is none at this point. The only information I guess I can give you, as our goal is to, because there is no Kings teams involved, would be to get our younger divisions, so initiation, discovery, novice, and Adam on the ice as soon as possible. So the expectation is they will be within their cohorts and mini groups by probably September 12th-ish.
Yeah, the return to plan summary states September 8th. You should have an idea 5 days prior, September 3rd. I don't know how that works out for the long weekend, but that's when you should know. And how long you're going to know, we don't know. I don't know if Brad, are we going to be able to provide 2 weeks, 2 days, 4 weeks, 6 weeks? What do you know?
Depends on how soon the division directors are able to get their cohort groups together and how quickly we can schedule it. But the earliest they're going to be on the ice is Tuesday, September 8th. That's obviously a Tuesday. We don't have enough to put everybody on the ice that day. So definitely not everybody's going to be hitting the ice that early within a specific division, but that'll be the earliest that teams hit for SPMHA.
Just to give the people on the call some perspective as well, Brad operates as our ice allocator. We typically schedule over 6,000 hours of ice a year. So in the first 6 weeks, when we're all of a sudden adjusting sizes for something standard, and I'll just parlay Dave here into the facilities question. We currently are in a situation where facilities operates 30-minute flood times, and we fought for the tooth and nail for the last several months to get them down to 15-minute flood times, which will be implemented September 1st. He's still got to go and he's still got to adjust that proportionate number of hours for the first 6 weeks of the season. So the divisional directors are working hard to create those groups, and once Brad gets them, he's got to go and adjust all the schedules. So we'll try and have it as soon as we can. And why didn't we have it August 2nd? Because the world was different August 2nd, and it'll be different on September 2nd. So, Dawn, just on your question, further discussion with the county around.
Elton, to answer Wesley's question, the answer is his director will email out information to him regarding where those things will be, as well as it'll be posted on the SPMHA website for them to view. It's just we're not having that information yet because we haven't got there. So Wesley, you will find it and it will be emailed to you from your director. We're just we're not there yet. So as soon as we have it out, you'll have it out. We'll have it out to you. You can expect that from your director and on the website.
Thanks, Jillian.
Thanks, Jillian. I'll just answer Dawn's question here, Fensky, really quick. Further discussion with the county on arena capacities and spectator enforcement. We've got an upcoming meeting on Thursday. We've secured 15-minute floods, so that's wonderful. I'm sure everyone who's been at a rink has experienced and has an opinion on 10-minute entry times into facilities, and every rink is different. So right now, that's one of our primary concerns. As far as capacities and spectator enforcement, I guess that becomes the next item, and we're still kind of subject to what they stipulate as per Alberta Health Services. So our goal is to be able to give you time to get your kids in there and not be rushed. And then as soon as Alberta Health allows them to adjust, I think the return to play guidelines, Dave, say 100 max, but each person has, or each facility has different maximum limits. You want to just finish this statement for me if I'm missing anything?
Yeah, basically that's it. Each facility is going to have different guidelines because, of course, you can put more people into the arena than you can into Broadmoor. So that's something that we're continually working with Strathcona County on as far as amending our usage guidelines as far as how and in what capacity we're going to be able to use those facilities. I think it's probably important to also throw out right now that the continued usage of those facilities is really going to depend on how well our membership follows those guidelines. So if the guideline is you must be masked and you must be 6 feet apart or 2 meters apart in the stands, and that is not being followed, that will quickly be taken away by the facilities. So once we have those final rules and they get out and disseminated out to our membership, it is very important that we follow those rules while in the facilities. Otherwise, they will be clawed back.
Lori went and just typed out, oh, sorry, Dave. Lori has added a question on there to us, just if we could speak to what rink entries look like right now. I can speak to it. You can speak to it.
Sure, go for it.
Right, so at the current moment, through the arena and the shell, SOC and GARC, you're not allowed in until 10 minutes in. You got to get out 10 minutes after. We advise you to dress in the parking lot while the weather's still warm, or show up home dressed. They are designating available dressing rooms. People are utilizing space all over the place. So adherence to social distancing is subjective, if you will. So we would encourage anyone showing up at the current moment to be able to be prepared to have their kid on the ice as soon as possible. And we will communicate if we can get 30 minutes in advance. If you're at Millennium Place, you can probably walk in 45 minutes in advance and you're not getting questioned. It's just so big, it's harder for them to handle, I guess. So Lori, is that enough? Or?
Yeah, just so that the parents that haven't had a chance to be at the rinks aren't caught off guard, showing up half an hour or 45 minutes in advance and realizing that you have to change in the parking lot. So we'll try and communicate to the divisions as well, but just so everyone knows, it's changed a little bit.
Yeah, I think our hope is, and we'll have more information or updated information on Thursday. The pitch or the push that we put forward to them was, look, it doesn't make sense to be rushing all of these participants through your doors 10 minutes prior. You're not accomplishing social distance activities by limiting the amount of time that they can come in. So let's expand that timeline to 30 to 40 minutes prior to your session, so that one, they can have a staggered approach in, and secondly, use the dressing rooms effectively as holding pens. So get the kids into the dressing rooms, hold them in the dressing rooms. Once the other team vacates the ice and the ice is ready to go, they proceed straight out onto the ice. So I think based on our conversation, that's where we're going to end up. But again, that information will be put out to the membership once we have it. Next up, Barry's question. Can my U7 still attend power skating lessons in Edmonton in addition to participating in SPMHA hockey? If those skating lessons in Edmonton are socially distanced lessons, physically distanced, meaning that they are not participating within each other and that program is not cohorting them, then yes, you can. Rich's question, for assistant coaches, will we be strictly with our own child or will it be a divide and conquer approach? All assistant coaches will act in the same capacity as assistant coaches in the past, where they will be acting as assistant coaches for the whole team. The only question will be, will you be a physically distanced assistant coach or a cohorted coach? So again, that comes down to the question of whether or not you'll have to wear a mask and remain that physical distance, or whether you'll be able to remove the mask and participate within that physical distance with the players. Ben's question, will there be any costs for cohort groups such as equipment bond, coaches insurance, etc.? Example, those costs that would otherwise be covered by a cash call or fundraising. Currently, and the timing is fantastic because we just had a call to discuss this information today. At this point, the idea with the mini groups is to the KISS philosophy, keep it simple. So we're trying to ensure that on those mini groups, because we don't know how long they're going to last, that teams will not have to require a team bond this year, so that we don't have to do cash calls and we don't have to open bank accounts. That is the goal and the plan. We're still working through that plan to make sure that we analyze all the details. My guess is the only, once the final approval comes through, the only activities that mini groups will be authorized or given permission to do will be strictly physically distanced developmental activities. And those, your team will have to determine how they're going to go about paying them, whether it's just direct to the supplier of those or some other method. But again, the goal is going to be to not have to open bank accounts, do cash calls, at least for the foreseeable future. That's all the questions.
Yeah, I don't even think I have anything to add. I think you nailed that, right? We want to be able to provide our members with a hockey experience that's an escape from what's going on in the real world. Playing hockey it's not a right, it's a privilege. We're working as hard as we can to be able to provide something that's feasible for people within the regulations we have. But we do have to recognize too that this may be a short period, it may be a longer period, and we need to avoid just doing everything that we used to do. Nothing else in the world at the moment operates in a normal capacity. Nothing. And that includes our competitive leagues. So we have to recognize that. And once we get past that emotionally and we can accept it, we can recognize that some of these decisions, like maybe deposit checks coming back, no team bonds, understanding that we're not going to grant special event permits for you to have a pizza party with your team. We want your kids to develop and they're going to go through a different process than what they're used to. That's our main goal.
One additional question just came through, at least on my end. If my child's thinking becoming a referee, how would that work with the cohorts? At this point, with the exhibition games, the recommendation is that it's going to be coach ref. I don't think that's changed at this point. So if it does, and we end up going to a larger, into the next phase, the modified competition phase, my guess is the refs will be incorporated at that point. But for the time being, my understanding is that Hockey Alberta's recommendation is we're not using any referees. Elton, did you catch anything different?
I would advise you to go to the Hockey Alberta officials website. In the release that just came out the other day, they talked about training for officials and training for two different groups, levels 1 to 3, and I think levels 4 to 6. Jillian, maybe I might be off, starting after Thanksgiving. So at this point, communication will come out. We've become big advocates of committees. We have the officials committee with Strathcona County. That includes the presidents of all the neighboring associations, headed up by the referee in chief. And the objective is to communicate with those who are interested. So anyone who's interested in officiating, I would direct you to either A, reach out to our referee in chief, Ray Keller, and B, to check out the Hockey Alberta officials website for more details. I guess I can just take the next question here because you've got to probably be dehydrated at this point. Anna, we are looking at having development managers. There's still details that go with the development group, such as inputting details in the team snap, coaching certification. For any coaches who are on this call, there's a return to play certification clinic required by Hockey Alberta. It's free. We'll get it communicated in the next newsletter. Read the newsletter, and there will just be modified duties. What's that?
Contact tracing. At the end of the day, with the managers, there's still going to be all sorts of off-ice stuff that coaches are going to need help with. Managers aren't assigned. They're chosen by their coaches, and coaches will need managers within those mini groups to manage some of that off-ice stuff. At the beginning, the duties will be limited, but they will be needed.
So we don't have any other questions left. Before I just finish with a closing statement, does anybody, any of the panelists, is there anything you think that we haven't addressed that would warrant a quick 30-second comment?
I just think Josh and I had a little bit of a detailed conversation regarding goalies. So Josh, do you want to maybe just touch on goalies?
Yeah, we're still debating what the right process is for goalies. As this year is a change year for all of hockey, with the U9 kids coming into U11 for the first time, coming from a half ice program where they played a maximum of 40% in the net, transitioning to a year where they're going to 5-on-5 full ice play for the first time. So it's a unique situation that we're involved in. So one of the things we need to be cognizant of as well at this point is making sure that through these practice cohorts or development cohorts that we also have the appropriate amount of goalies, so that should and when a season does start, we have the appropriate amount of goalies. So I know that our hockey ops, led by Kevin, who is our goalie director, has some excellent plans for the upcoming season as far as some additional goalie development this year, and continue to try to develop in-house goaltenders. So there'll be a little bit more to that to come in the coming days, I think. Yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Josh. I think, you know, if I was to dovetail on top of that, the other advantage of this year with goaltenders is since these teams aren't finalized, we have the ability to look at it, see how those kids do fit in, and adjust if we get to that point where we're playing actual games. Well, league, competition games.
Yeah, sorry, just one more thing to add. I don't think it can be stressed enough that this is a developmental phase. These are not going to be the teams that your kids are going to play on if and when the season does start. And I think it's important that we really hit that home to avoid some hurt feelings potentially down the road. There will be movement. The difficult part is your kids might end up making new friends twice this year, which isn't a bad thing either. They have the opportunity to make twice as many friends as normal, which isn't a bad thing. So just, really stress that and want to hit that home that there will be movement as early as the first few weeks, as it was touched on before. If, there's a need to move a player because we just don't feel they're in the right cohorted group, we need to be able to make that change so that we ensure that the players have a good opportunity to develop and don't feel like they're being pushed in an inappropriate manner, so to speak.
Exactly. One additional, are you done there, Josh?
Yep. Anything
else, Jillian?
No, I'm just really excited. I think this development year is going to be the best thing it's ever been for actually goalies. And I agree with you, for kids that are in the hitting program, this is going to be a greater time to learn and get the opportunity to be placed in those teams instead of, a couple games over evaluations. This is going to really, really develop those kids that are in those two positions, hitting, not a position, but in the opportunity to be doing in the hitting program and goalies. I'm very excited for the development this year for those kids.
Well, that dovetails perfectly into the question that's just popped up in the last second here. For children in the U13 second year Pee Wee fighting to get into Bantam Hitting League for next year, this year sounds like a major disadvantage. What is your suggestion for those that have grown in game and stature over this year and don't have a chance to try out? Like you've mentioned, players could be spread over 3 tiers. How can we get a fair chance to those who are in a critical year? At the end of the day, my full expectation is we are going to have more kids playing hitting hockey under the developmental program or the developmental phase than we do following a regular tryout procedure, because we have that flexibility that we can put as many kids into hitting cohorts as there are kids that want to try hitting, which is a fantastic opportunity for those kids to, one, get the experience of hitting, because we do have a large majority, well, not a large majority, some kids who come out of a hitting as soon as they start and realize, it's not quite for me. And the second is it allows them to learn to hit while also competing with kids that should be roughly the same skill caliber with skating and all of the other skills that are involved. So I disagree with the presumption that it's a disadvantage. If anything, it is an advantage for those kids this year. And if they show during the developmental phase that they excel in the hitting program, then that'll give them a good opportunity to move into a full hitting team if and when that time comes.
Thanks, Dave. I think this actually works out quite perfect. We're just past 9 o'clock. We don't have any open questions. As mentioned at the start, if there's questions that derive from here that you're not comfortable posting, you want to take it offline, like I said, my number is all over the internet, so feel free to give a call. Just a comment on the way out. I said at the start, I just want to say thanks again. I appreciate all the panelists, all the people on the board. For those of you who know me, this is probably close to 100 meetings since the world shut down. So I better give a shout out to my wife as well for ignoring me while I was in the office for hours and hours and hours with every entity that you name, Hockey Alberta, Hockey Canada. We're going to do the best we can. So, we appreciate your support. I want to wish you all the best in the upcoming return to school, whatever path you elect. We're going to do the best we can to get your kid on the ice in a reduced stress environment to give them escape from whatever's going on in the world. So if you have any other questions, please reach out. Other than that, like Jillian said, your divisional directors will be in contact in the near future. And we wish you the best, and we'll see you around the rink as soon as we can.